Good morning. Before I begin in John 19, I think from time to time what God saw when he looked at Saul of Tarsus, a man who was completely opposed to God and persecuting Christians. So we know he was a man who was trained and taught and educated, a man who knew the scriptures well. I'm sure when God saw that, he saw a way, he saw potential that he could be used. And I try my best when I meet people. I look at some good traits of character, some things that I can see in them, some potential. If they were to become a Christian, they would be a great force for good. As we look at John and we see people like Pilate, I want to impress upon you that these are living and breathing people that had real emotions and ideas and complexities, but I'm reminded this past week that sometimes sin is, in the end, nothing but sin. Sometimes we see horrific things be done, we can't reason with it, we can't think about it, and we make no excuse for it. We don't say, well, I've sinned in other ways, so I'm exempt, or I'm not as bad as them, so I'm exempt, because we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Though we understand the complexities of this life, though we understand many pressures we face, sin is sin and there is no excuse for it. As we begin in chapter 19, we see Pilate saying that Jesus should be scourged and punished. And in one way, yes, he is hoping that he would be released. He's hoping that he's not put to death. He's done nothing wrong. He's committed no crime. But you don't punish someone who is innocent if they've committed no crime just to compromise with others. John 19:1 we read, "So then Pilate took Jesus and scourged him, and the soldiers twisted a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put on him a purple robe. Then they said, 'Hail, King of the Jews!' and they struck him with their hands. Pilate then went out again and said to them, 'Behold, I'm bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him.'" Pilate is clearly guilty of sin. I did not mean to take away from that in my last message. I don't think that was understood, but I want to be clear about that. But I want to focus here on these soldiers, because these soldiers are tasked with following orders. They're tasked with punishing this man so that the crowd might be satiated. Perhaps if he's punished, if he's beaten, perhaps they will turn away from what they had planned for him. Again, Paul said that he suffered many times the stripes and beatings of the Jews, is it 50 times minus one? Because in their mind it would be cruel and unusual to strike someone and beat them 50 times or more than 50 times, and we don't want to beat them more than 50 times, so just to be safe, we'll only beat them 49 times. If we lose count, and maybe it's actually 50, but we count 49, then we'll be within the parameters of the law. I need you to understand when we look at the sufferings of Christ that Roman soldiers had no such limitation. They had no such restriction. And Jesus was not beaten with rods, most likely. He was not beaten with a whip. If you think of the word whip, you might think of Indiana Jones or some sort of action-adventure movie. It's this long cord that, goes forth and cracks. When I was little, I think it's strange when I see a whip and talking about a whip cracking, I think, is the whip striking itself? Why is the whip making this noise? The whip makes that noise because as the whip curves and the end lashes, the speed accelerates. The speed goes faster than the speed of sound. That's why you have a small sonic boom. Like a jet that goes faster than the speed of sound, the whip travels at such a speed that it cracks. The Romans did not have a long whip that you see in films. They had a shorter whip of multiple lashes. And each of those lashes would have either a sharp piece of something to scrape the flesh or something to pound the flesh. And I don't want to be graphic for the sake of being graphic, but I want to impress upon you, they could have punished him any number of ways. They chose to punish him in this way. This was the empire of the oppression that these people were under. And they could have taken him and they could have beaten him. They could have, obviously, Pilate didn't want him to be put to death. He didn't want him to die. All they were told was probably, make sure to punish this man, make sure to beat him, and see that he is still breathing, see that he still lives. But these soldiers don't just do that. If they were to do that and just carry on their duty, we might just dismiss what they had done. But they took him, and they mocked him, and they added to his misery. They spit on him, they plucked out his beard hairs, I believe the scriptures say, and they struck him. And in all this, not only did they go beyond what they were told to do, they made a mockery of him. What it means for them to hear that he was called King of the Jews, what that meant to them, I have no idea. But they dressed him up in purple and mocked him. He was, in their eyes, no king. They placed a crown of thorns on his head, and these thorns are not necessarily what we would encounter. They were very large, very sharp, and sometimes even some thorns in that region would cause the hand to swell and cause much pain. Cause your skin to swell up. We don't know exactly what he encountered, but they made a mockery of him. The other Gospels say that they struck him and they would say, "Prophesy, who struck you?" So there's something more to their knowledge of Christ as just some sort of political figure. They must have known that he claimed to work miracles, or people said he worked miracles. They must have wanted him to prophesy, want to speak something. And again, like a lamb before shears is silent, he opened not his mouth. Jesus had conversations before the high priest. He spoke with Pilate, but many of the times he was silent when he could have defended himself, when he could have said or done a lot more, because all these things had to take place. But once again, God appointed this to take place, that he would be delivered into the hands of evil and wicked men, but they are without excuse in their evil and their wickedness. Pilate had punished him. He brought him out, and oddly enough, like almost the opposite. Yes, I've punished him. He's been beaten severely. He stands before you in pain and in this mock dressing because I find no fault in him. Someone who you find no fault in is not someone you punish. We continue reading in verse 5. Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." Implied in this is the question, has he not been punished enough? Has he not suffered enough? Are you not yet satisfied with what he's received? Therefore, when the chief priests and officers saw him, they cried out, saying, "Crucify him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "You take him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him." The way he was dressed may have even caused them to even more double down on their insistence that he die. Even dressed as a king in mockery would have been an offense to them. So they cried out that he should be crucified. What had happened so far is not enough. Now, at the end of verse 6, it sounds like he's giving them permission to take him and to kill him. This is not the case. We've already established that they did not have that authority. They did not have that power. What Pilate is saying is, you would have to be the one to take him and crucify him, because I've already passed judgment. I've already said there is nothing wrong in him. There's no crime in him. There's no fault in him. I have found no fault in him. If he was going to crucify him, it would have to be you. They were not unprepared for this. Verse 7, the Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to our law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God." Therefore, when Pilate heard that saying, he was the more afraid, and went again to the praetorium and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. As a lamb before his shearers is silent, he opened not his mouth. Pilate had all the more reason to be concerned. The other Gospels tell us that his wife had had a dream at night and told him not to have anything to do with this man. She'd been vexed throughout the night, and to Pilate this is a message from the gods. Do not have anything to do with him. What if he is the Son of God? What if he is the son of one of the gods according to his religion? And what would become of him if he were to deliver him to be crucified? We see a lack of understanding, a lack of superstition, but he knows exactly what he's doing, and he has some reprehension, he has some fear about what is going to transpire. But still, he's insulted that Jesus would not answer him. If he gave an order, it was carried out. If he asked a question, it was answered. And Jesus almost insults him by not answering him. Verse 10 says, Pilate said, are you not speaking to me? Do you not know that I have the power to crucify you and the power to release you? Why would anyone not defend themselves at this time and in this instance if their life is on the line? We know the answer because Jesus had to suffer these things. But Jesus makes one thing abundantly clear in verse 11. He does say this: you could have no power at all against me unless it had been given to you from above. Therefore, the one who delivered me to you has the greater sin. There's a sense in which every sin is damning and condemning. Every sin brings about death. But Jesus here lets us know there are greater sins. There are sins that have greater consequences. And those who were given every advantage, those who were given the law, those who ought to have known his identity, we can excuse Pilate's ignorance, we can't excuse theirs. So that and that alone would be enough to say they are guilty of the greater sin. But we don't take comfort in the fact that we do not commit greater sins than others. As Pilate is still condemned for what he's about to do, in spite of his theatrics, in spite of him washing his hands and this and that. There's no one here that takes Jesus and does these things that is not guiltless. There is no one who can stand before God in judgment and say, I am guiltless, I am justified. I had good reason for doing what I did. I'm not like these other evildoers out there. The sad and bitter irony of it all is it was all for nothing. All these people who, again, put Jesus on trial. Annas, one of the high priests, his family suffered an attack, and he and some of them were killed. Caiaphas was removed by Rome as high priest a little bit later. Pilate, again, the rest of the chapter that we see him, he's afraid that he's going to lose his position because they accuse him of being unfaithful to Caesar. And even the accusation thereof, the Caesar that's in power at this time, could have been enough for him to lose his position. Years later, Pilate would lose his position. He would be in exile, and he would die in exile. Obviously, Jesus was going to die. Obviously, God foreordained it, but he could have stepped up. He could have done what was right. He could have opposed them and wagered losing his position. But he committed a grave sin. Of course, he lost his position anyway. Because all power that we're given is fleeting if it comes from men, but obviously God would have to allow these things and give us this authority for a time. Power can corrupt, and obviously we ought not to be corrupted and do what's right regardless. Verse 12. From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, if you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he brought Jesus out and sat down in the judgment seat in a place that is called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the preparation day of the Passover, and about the 6th hour. Then he said to the Jews, behold your king. But they cried out, away with him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, shall I crucify your king? The chief priests answered, we have no king but Caesar. Again, Pilate was inconsistent. Pilate was ignorant. But the chief priest appealed to Caesar at their king, Caesar whom they hated, Caesar to whom Barabbas had revolted against, and they wanted him to go free. But to be sure that Pilate would do what they wanted him to do, they appealed to Caesar. We have no king but Caesar. They rejected the true king that their people had been waiting for centuries, that God had promised them, and ultimately rejected the kingdom. Then he delivered him to them to be crucified. They took Jesus and led him away. And he, bearing his cross, went out to a place called the place of the skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha, where they crucified him and two others with him, one on the either side and Jesus in the center. Now Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross. The writing was, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. This was written in Hebrew, this was written in Latin, this was written in Greek, so anyone who passed by into the city would see this inscription and know what it said. Many of the Jews read the title from the place where Jesus was crucified near the city. It was written again in these three languages. Therefore, the chief priest of the Jews said to Pilate, do not write the King of the Jews, but he said, I am the King of the Jews. He only claimed to be King of the Jews. It's clear that they've rejected him. Pilate answered, what I have written, I have written. Again, we see the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, took his garments, made 4 parts to each soldier a part, and also the tunic. The tunic was without seam, woven from top in one piece, similar to what the high priest wore, and we'll not get into that for sake of time. They said therefore among themselves, let us not tear it, but cast lots for it, whose it shall be, that scripture might be fulfilled, which says, they divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Therefore the soldiers did these things. You look to the soldiers, you look to the Sanhedrin, you look to Pilate. You see different motivations, you see different levels of what we might call a depravity. But sin is sin. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. For all this reason, for all this purpose, Christ was prophesied to do these things. These things were prophesied that they might come to pass. God had foreordained this might come to pass, that the sins of all from the foundation of the world might be taken away, might be done away with. We can come boldly before the throne of grace because Jesus Christ is our high priest who has offered up himself as an offering for sin. And if any have not obeyed the gospel, if you understand these things, you understand Jesus of Nazareth is the King of the Jews, the King of all mankind. He is God and man. He is the King of kings and Lord of lords, the one to whom we must give an account when this life is over on that final day. If you believe all these things, if you will turn from a life dedicated to sin and turn to the living God, if you'll confess him, put him on in baptism, and faithfully abide in his truth, and allow his truth and his word to sanctify you. If you've done those things and have turned away, then come back to him. Do not justify yourself. Do not compare yourself to others. Look at your own sin with the same horror that we look on the most horrific acts done by man. The way God looks upon every one of our transgressions. God who is pure and holy and cannot be upon sin and look upon sin. Whatever the need, let it be known as we sing this final song of encouragement.